finding inner stability when your job feels meaningless. You are lying awake in the dark, and your mind feels completely hollowed out by the repetitive, mechanical pace of modern labor that treats your presence like a replaceable gear. Your nervous system is carrying a deep corporate alienation, a quiet numbness that has accumulated from spending your daylight hours executing tasks that feel entirely disconnected from a genuine human voice. Right now, there is an exhausting internal fragmentation behind your eyes, a heavy impression that your real identity has been permanently stifled or automated by a system that only tracks metrics. The atmosphere in your sleeping space is cool, carrying the clean, grassy aroma of dry hemp stalks, the faint scent of natural vegetable wax candles, and the steady, rhythmic patter of summer rain hitting broad hosta leaves outside the open veranda. The flat surface beneath you provides an unmoving clay-like foundation, offering a steady floor that asks absolutely no production targets or efficiency adjustments from your tired spirit. Your fingers are resting open, yet they might feel stiff with the phantom habit of clicking, typing, or scrolling through digital files that possess no true weight. The inner texture of your presence is not permanently ruined or depleted, simply because you feel this mechanical emptiness tonight. This current state of professional alienation is not a personal failure, but the natural consequence of a mind that has been forced to mimic the absolute consistency of a machine. Tonight, there is no requirement for you to discover your ultimate life purpose, and there is no obligation to justify your creative utility before sleep arrives. We are not here to mechanically fix your career path, nor are we here to demand that you immediately feel inspired or passionate about the tasks that have drained your reserves. Your internal canvas is not permanently blank. It is simply waiting for the structural frame to be cleared of external noise. The intellect functions under a painful paradox, believing that to protect its creative freedom, it must constantly achieve a specialized, extraordinary status in the eyes of the world. We treat our daily, ordinary labor as an undignified prison sentence, a dangerous sign of stagnation that must be overcome by constantly striving for grander recognition. Yet this continuous striving for professional distinctiveness is the very mechanism that transforms routine tasks into a state of chronic, exhausting alienation. This is the surprising insight that Buddhist wisdom offers to a heavy heart. The real emptiness we experience does not live within the repetitive nature of the work itself, but in our internal resistance to the ordinary moments of existence. We spend our lives trying to escape the plain texture of the day, completely unaware that true dignity functions like the hand braiding of a heavy hemp floor mat, where value is achieved not by using gold thread, but by allowing each ordinary coarse fiber to be placed with undivided attention. Perhaps you have felt this specific alienation too, during the quiet hours when the machines are finally silent and the notifications stop arriving. It is a unique kind of spiritual exhaustion, this feeling that you are merely an automated process waiting for the next command, while your authentic voice is left uncultivated. If it feels right, let the density of your physical form sink completely into the unmoving sanctuary of the floor, allowing your spine to settle and rest heavily against the bed. You do not need to solve the riddle of your professional life tonight, and there is no obligation to plan your creative escape before the morning arrives. The darkness does not require you to present a ledger of achievements to prove that your presence is valid. It is completely permitted for your frame to lie empty and still, allowing the raw demands of utility to slide completely out of your focus. In a short while, we will travel down to a quiet valley loom house, where an old weaver demonstrates how ordinary rough fibers form an unyielding foundation when woven with absolute presence. For now, let these spoken cadences exist as simple markers along the perimeter of your room, asking nothing from your analytical intellect but the freedom to let the mechanical tension release its grip. Right now, your physical form is simply breathing in the stillness, and that is completely enough to reestablish your own territory in the night. The mind may continue to replay the monotonous emails, the abstract deadlines, and the digital metrics you tracked since dawn, but the body is only interested in the immediate air that is currently moving through this specific square of space. Each breath is an unhurried arrival, a cool drop of nourishment that does not ask how many tasks you completed or what vocational targets you are still expected to manage tomorrow. You might notice how the breath does not care about your job title, never wondering if it should accelerate its rhythm to prove its productivity to those around you. It simply fulfills its natural purpose, clearing the center of your chest and then departing quietly without leaving a single trace of performance behind. If it feels comfortable, bring your attention to the brief silent pause that occurs at the very end of your next exhalation. In that tiny clearance, before the new air returns, there is a total absence of labor. A small sanctuary where no schedules are being monitored and no professional identities are being defended. You do not need to leap across that quiet gap to secure your place in the economic machine, for the earth will hold its rotation without your active input. The burdened self that is terrified of insignificance is not the absolute ruler of this room. Only this calm, breathing form is present, and only this form is worthy of the deep rest that the night is offering. Perhaps you can allow the speed of your thoughts to match the slow, heavy drop of the summer rain outside. There is no need to resolve the long-term direction of your career tonight, and there is no obligation to find your creative voice to earn the comfort of the dark. The raw hemp fiber does not apologize to the loom for being plain, as it simply allows itself to be gathered into the weave. Let your awareness slide into that same quiet permission, leaving the external metrics to fade into the shadow, while you remain securely anchored in the unhurried stillness of this frame. The structural integrity of a life can often be found recorded in the tools that handle the rawest materials, long before any pattern becomes visible to the casual eye. Down in the deep crease of a low western valley, where the moisture from the marshlands constantly fed the broad leaves of the riverside fields, a sprawling, open-sided workshop sat sheltered beneath a heavy overhanging eave. The air here was constantly thick with the clean, green fragrance of sun-dried hemp stalks, the trace of river silt, and the cool dampness of a steady summer shower that darkened the unpaved paths outside. A young man named Keon had spent several years working as a master scribe in the regional administrative town, his days entirely consumed by copying rows of legal tax codes, property registers, and official commercial permits. He carried a heavy, mechanical exhaustion in the center of his chest, a floating sensation of spiritual emptiness that made him feel like a hollow reed, through which thousands of meaningless symbols passed without ever leaving a mark of real beauty. He could not stop replaying the identical columns of ink, the rigid quotas of the registry house, and the persistent fear that his genuine individual voice had been permanently flattened by the routine of his labor. Every time he picked up his writing brush, he felt a wave of internal alienation, believing that the mechanical consistency demanded of his hands had severed his connection to any sacred reality. Seeking a temporary reprieve from the relentless ledger books, Keon walked for 2 days until he reached the low valley loom house managed by an elderly lay practitioner named Master Jin. Jin was a person who moved with immense economy of motion, his wide shoulders relaxed under a faded blue tunic, his palms rough and gray from decades of handling unrefined plant cords. He did not participate in the complex scholarly debates of the mountain monasteries, spending his hours solely managing the construction of the large, thick floor coverings that protected the local temple walkways from muddy sandals. When the summer downpours turned the courtyard into a sheet of gray water, Jin would stand calmly before a massive vertical timber frame, holding his primary meditation anchor. This was a worn mountain boxwood weaving shuttle, a smooth, heavy block of golden wood that had grown entirely dark and glassy along its undersides from years of sliding across the tensioned warp threads of the loom. The young scribe sat down on a low block of pressed clay, watching the master prepare the base for a massive new mat that was intended for the meditation hall of the district temple. Keon expected the weaver to select fine, rare silks or brightly dyed wool threads to match the spiritual dignity of the destination. Since the building was highly revered and the local scholars were known to value exquisite artistry instead, Jin reached into a large wicker basket and pulled out a handful of coarse, unbleached hemp strands, their fibers dark and plain, smelling strongly of the open fields and the river dirt. The old man placed the boxwood shuttle into the cradle of the warp, moving it horizontally through the thick grid, with a slow, regular clack that echoed softly against the rain-drenched hosta leaves outside. He did not rush to finish the row, and he did not decorate the border with intricate patterns to catch the eye of a collector. He repeated the movement, letting the heavy wooden shuttle glide smoothly through the plain chords, leaving each ordinary fiber precisely where it fell without trying to force the thread to look like something finer than it was. The visiting scribe stood up, his soft leather boots stepping quietly across the earthen floor. Approaching the great frame to touch the rough surface of the growing mat, he watched the boxwood shuttle slide back and forth, feeling the absolute stability of the heavy timbers, while the plain hemp strands were slowly packed together by a wooden comb. Kian asked the master how a worker could find any spiritual meaning or personal voice in such a monotonous, repetitive craft, noting that each row looked exactly like the one before it, and the material itself was incredibly coarse. He wondered if the soul would not grow completely numb from passing the same wooden block through the same ordinary fibers day after day, rather than seeking a higher, more expressive art form that allowed for personal distinction. Jin did not drop his shuttle, nor did he check the length of the completed weave. He rested the smooth boxwood tool within the palm of his right hand, letting his arm hang loosely at his side, allowing his weight to settle into the solid earth beneath the porch. He spoke into the damp valley air, his voice low and regular, matching the steady rhythm of the rain hitting the thatch roof above them. He said that a clerk who believes his dignity lives only in the grandeur of his text will always find his peace at the mercy of the ledger book, for his mind is constantly searching for a specialized status that the paper can never provide. He explained that the boxwood shuttle brings peace because it does not know the difference between a high decree and a plain strand of field grass, as it treats every single thread with the exact same undivided presence. The true emptiness happens only when the mind refuses to occupy the simple movement of the hand, forgetting that the highest alignment is found when we stop fighting the ordinary texture of the hour. Kian looked down at the smooth underside of the boxwood shuttle, watching the old man's calloused thumb trace the grain of the wood while the rain continued its unhurried descent. A sudden quiet recognition entered his chest, cutting through the exhausting loops of his professional anxiety. He saw that he had been treating his own daily consciousness like a prison, believing he had to produce an extraordinary, unique masterpiece every afternoon to justify his space on the earth. The mechanical numbness he carried was not a sign that his creative spirit was dead, but the friction of his intellect trying to escape the plane, repetitive rows of his actual life instead of entering them completely. The old weaver lifted the wooden shuttle once more, guiding it smoothly through the parting threads, letting the weight of the block carry the fiber home without a single drop of hesitation. He noted that a person who knows how to treat each ordinary moment as a complete stitch can weave a foundation that never feels hollow, for the baseline of awareness requires no specialized title to be whole. But the young clerk had yet to discover how a flat copper token could transform a routine counting task into a place of profound psychological liberation. Right now, as you listen to the steady clack of the boxwood shuttle in that valley workshop, you can allow the unfulfilled expectations of your own modern career to rest exactly as they are. You do not need to discover your ultimate creative calling tonight to deserve the complete protection of this room. The alienation you felt was real, and the mechanical numbness it left behind is a natural weight on a tired spirit. But your awareness is fully capable of holding the routine without losing its essential depth. If it feels right, let your breath move smoothly through the center of your frame, honoring the physical form without asking it to resolve every vocational conflict before the morning arrives. The space around your bed is completely unconcerned with the digital metrics you tracked this afternoon. The walls are quiet, the darkness is steady, and your breathing form is perfectly complete without the illusion of an extraordinary professional status. You might notice how the night does not demand that you present a list of grand accomplishments, offering the exact same quiet shelter to your hollowed-out heart as it does to the plain hemp mats in the valley outside. There is no requirement to settle the direction of your life before you are permitted to let your eyes close, for the current hour is only interested in the weight that is currently sinking into the bed. Let the loops of the office fade into the shadow, leaving you with the simple, heavy reality of this immediate rest. This vision of the young scribe discovering the purpose of the plain boxwood shuttle is not an invitation to turn your heart into a cold, mechanical block of wood. It does not look to transform you into an isolated stone, completely disconnected from the warmth of human aspirations or the natural desire to express your authentic creative voice. The wisdom found in the architecture of the Simple Valley loom points toward a completely different kind of emotional freedom. The primary difficulty we experience in our daily labor is often just the initial movement of a routine task, a simple realization that the immediate chore is plain and repetitive. The true exhaustion begins when we try to build a massive mental resistance within our own chest to escape the moment, creating an internal strain that warps our entire sense of security. The core suffering does not reside within the fact that the work is ordinary, but rather in our internal insistence that we must perform an extraordinary role to prove our worth. We layer a heavy weight of chronic dissatisfaction over our natural capacity for presence, causing our individual structure to tremble under a load it was never meant to hold. When we discuss attachment in the stillness of this evening, we are describing that specific mental reflex that demands we find our identity only in the absolute praise of our professional peers. It is the tight, heavy sensation in your chest that insists you cannot be personally safe until every metric and every title in your workplace remains completely elevated. Craving becomes that desperate Latinite urge to fix your vocational status, treating a normal period of routine execution as a dangerous sign of your own absolute failure. We believe that if we can just achieve enough external recognition, the structural bond of our life will remain secure. Buddhist insight gently reminds us that forcing your own spirit to act as a specialized machine without recognizing the fluid nature of your actual presence always results in a fragile existence. True harmony relies on the independent depth of your own internal space, resting securely within its own boundaries. Mindfulness is simply the capacity to stand firmly on your own ground without automatically reaching out to fight the passing routine of the day. It is the quiet act of observing a monotonous spreadsheet or a repetitive task, without deciding that you must immediately alter your own internal state to escape it. When we notice that all human markets are inherently shifting and constantly changing, we realize that the mechanical requirements of our labor are not hostile forces meant to destroy us. They are merely passing threads, sustained only because we refuse to allow the empty spaces within our frame to remain clear. Letting go does not mean you abandon your creative voice or stop opening your mind to future opportunities. It means you finally recognize that leaving a healthy clearance between your true well-being and your daily title is the only way to keep your own structure standing. Your internal space functions as the wide valley sky that holds the loom house without being compressed by the weight of the timber or the movement of the threads. It is the vast field within you that can feel the boredom of another routine task, yet recognizes that the external metric does not dictate the physical reality of your own value. Compassion is the willingness to look at your own tiredness without wanting to punish your frame for feeling empty in a demanding room. It is the understanding that you cannot truly provide a sanctuary if your own center has been completely dried out by the constant pressure to be extraordinary. The old weaver did not reject the coarse hemp for being plain. He simply respected its purpose enough to let the wooden shuttle carry it through the grid without friction. When this realization settles into the breath, the way you sit within your own skin changes fundamentally, introducing an unshakable sort of safety. The mind stops acting as a desperate calculator, trying to secure every temporary room with the fragile glue of constant professional sacrifice. You begin to see that the darkness outside your window does not require you to justify the path that brought you to this bed. The night is simply vast, quiet, and completely unconcerned with the metrics you have been trying so hard to balance since dawn. The weight of the original routine or the intercepted deadline was a singular event, a passing thread that moved through the office and left its mark on the calendar. Yet the mind continues to drag the heavy loop over the same cold space, thinking that if it processes the details enough times, it can melt the sense of internal compression away. This constant internal friction is where the second layer of pain takes root, transforming a momentary chore into a permanent condition of survival. The teachings invite you to lift the heavy analysis from the path, allowing the warmth of your own presence to soothe the margins of your tiredness without demanding an immediate resolution from the world. You are allowed to carry the history of your labor without allowing it to dictate the volume of your breathing tonight. As the quietness of the hour deepens, the urge to manage the metrics of your career begins to lose its grip on the chest. You can feel the natural stability of the body returning, a solid alignment that has nothing to do with the fluctuating markets or the long-term changes that are absent from this room. The darkness around your bed is not waiting for a perfectly successful career, and it does not keep a ledger of the tasks you failed to perfect. It simply offers an open space where the pieces of your day can settle onto the earth, leaving your awareness free to rest in the baseline of this immediate reality. If it feels right, allow the heavy architecture of your shoulders to drop downward toward the support underneath you, giving up the rigid posture you maintained throughout the daylight hours. You might bring your awareness to the clear, rhythmic passage of the room's air as it enters the body, moving naturally without any deliberate steering from your mind. There is no requirement to strain or to regulate the depth of this inhalation, as the mere act of observing its current cadence is fully sufficient. Perhaps you can trace the cool, clean sensation at the back of the throat, followed by a softer, warmer release that returns quietly to the surrounding room. With each unhurried exhalation, you can invite the muscles of the jaw and the lower back to unburden themselves, letting the features of the body become spacious and completely unjoined. As you sit within this clear perimeter, a specific thought about an unresolved deadline or a heavy metric may present itself to your focus, seeking to occupy your internal space. Do not fight the presence of this thought, and do not attempt to construct a defense against it. Instead, you might gently give this internal pattern a simple title, perhaps calling it the mechanical routine or the corporate loop. Observe how this mental movement creates a subtle tightness across the chest, a physical impression that feels like a tensioned string waiting to snap under pressure. If it feels comfortable, imagine placing this precise worry into the form of a massive, empty loom frame, letting the thick timber beams hold the entire structure of that professional anxiety. You do not need to straighten the threads, and you do not need to force them to form a perfect pattern. Simply see this individual piece of timber framing standing securely on the heavy clay floor within your awareness, remaining completely distinct from the moving thoughts around it. Watch what happens to the internal image when you step back by a small measure, allowing a narrow gap of clear air to open around the perimeter of the interlocking wooden beams. The loom structure does not need to vanish from your vision, for it is entirely permitted to remain there, catching the damp valley air without pressing against your ribs. Even noticing the rise of the pattern is enough to begin the softening. You can return to this spacious posture whenever you are ready, but right now your only role is to serve as the silent space that allows these elements to remain separate. There is no urgency to force a profound emotional transformation or to clear every lingering sense of vocational alienation before the hour ends. The weight of the system's chaotic performance is allowed to sit outside your perimeter tonight, leaving your physical frame unburdened and your breath completely your own. As the borders of this internal landscape clarify, we follow the path further down into the low workshop, where the art of simple presence takes on an even deeper rhythm. Right now, your body is simply matching the natural drop of the rain as it finds its place in the soil below the porch. There is no need to mend the entire direction of your career before you are allowed to rest, and there is no obligation to fix the environment to earn the comfort of the dark. You might notice how the mattress receives your weight without asking which unfulfilled metrics brought you to this room, offering the exact same steady foundation to your body, regardless of your historical movement. Even a small pause between your thoughts is enough to let the internal compression settle completely, allowing the mind to coast to its own natural stop. Perhaps you can allow the remaining tension in your hands to release, letting the fingers curl naturally against the fabric of the bed. You are no longer holding the handles of the writing tools, and you are no longer responsible for maintaining the efficiency of your history against those who are absent. The night has taken over the management of the valley, covering the riverside fields and the heavy loom house in a blanket of absolute stillness. Let your awareness slide into that same quiet sanctuary, trusting the immediate current of your breath to carry you softly into the deep spaces of the night. Further along the low western ridge, where the drainage ditches collected the runoff from the high terraces, a wide porch canopy projected out over a clay processing yard. The air here was constantly filled with the heavy aroma of wet thatch, crushed plant stalks, and the clean metallic tang of weathered copper tokens that were used to track the local storehouse accounts. A young manager named Yura had traveled down to the valley processing shed to resolve a major inventory shortage, her mind entirely consumed by replaying a series of lost ledger records, broken commercial promises, and the persistent fear that a small clerical mistake would destroy her entire livelihood. She carried a profound internal agitation, a sharp sensation of mental fragmentation that made her feel like a single strand of fiber pulled taut until it was ready to snap under the weight of her own frantic calculations. Every evening, while the local workers returned to their families, she lay awake replaying the missing numbers, her eyes wide in the dark, desperately trying to build a flawless system of control that would shield her from the vulnerability of the marketplace. The keeper of this specific processing veranda was an elder monastic worker named Sister Maya. Maya was a person who moved with a steady, grounding economy of scale, her fingers calloused from years of stripping raw hemp stalks, her posture relaxed against a rough oak pillar that supported the open porch. She did not teach the deep philosophical sutras in the main hall, spending her mornings solely sorting the coarse bundles of plant material before they were tied into bundles for the spinning wheels. Resting in a shallow stone depression near her bare feet was her primary structural anchor, a flat, dark copper token, worn completely smooth along its circular rims by years of being slid across the clay floor to mark each completed pile of fiber. The token bore no specialized markings or official status stamps, yet it remained completely solid through every changing seasonal flood and every midnight downpour. One afternoon, a sudden blinding summer storm broke directly over the low valley, transforming the dirt courtyard into a rushing torrent of brown mud and forcing a crowd of frantic merchants to gather under the narrow porch canopy. The air grew intensely humid, and the merchants began to argue loudly over their delayed pack animals, their voices rising in sharp panic as they checked their digital registers and blamed one another for the lost hours. Yura sat on an inverted wooden tub, her palms pressed tightly against her knees, feeling a severe wave of her old internal compression. As the external anxiety of the room crowded her ears, she felt a powerful compulsion to join the loud debate, to demand immediate answers from the storage keepers, or to begin recalculating the entire inventory list from memory. Believing that any frantic intellectual movement was better than sitting quietly with the uncertainty of the storm. She watched the elder nun and wondered how anyone could maintain a quiet center when surrounded by a chaotic system that seemed to threaten their entire security. The old woman did not try to silence the shouting merchants, and she did not attempt to rearrange the wet bundles to appease the angry travelers. She stood calmly before her sorting table, took a fresh handful of rough, unrefined hemp strands, and began to separate the coarse exterior bark from the soft inner fiber, using a slow, deliberate, unhurried pull of her fingers. The regular, scraping whisper of the plant material cut through the loud complaints of the crowd, landing in the damp courtyard air like a calm, rhythmic breath. Maya did not accelerate her movements when a merchant stepped closer to shout a question about the delivery schedule, and she did not pause when the rain splashed cool water against her ankles. Every time she completed a single bundle, she picked up the flat copper token from the stone depression, slid it smoothly across the clay surface to mark the count, and then returned her hands to the raw material without a single trace of urgency. The visiting manager watched the nun from her seat on the tub, the tight compression in her chest gradually easing as the regular movement of the copper token filled the crowded porch. A subtle internal transformation began to take root within her awareness, arriving not as a sudden solution to the lost ledger records, but as a completely new way of relating to the surrounding chaos. She saw that she had been treating her own mind like a frantic ledger book, believing she had to balance every external circumstance before she was permitted to find her own ground. The anxiety she carried was not a sign that her capacity was broken, but the friction of her intellect trying to enforce a perfect pattern on a fluid world, instead of entering the immediate task with undivided attention. Yura took a long, quiet breath, letting the clean, grassy scent of the wet hemp fill the base of her throat before she spoke. For the first time in many seasons, she did not pull out her reference notes to verify the missing totals, or to argue with the local warehouse keepers about the delay. She stood up, walked slowly across the crowded veranda, and quietly held a dripping tarp away from a bundle of grain that belonged to one of the most volatile merchants in the circle. She did not pretend that the inventory shortage had magically resolved itself, and she did not force an artificial smile to conceal the genuine difficulty of her job. Instead, she simply chose to pause before reacting, sitting quietly with the uncertainty of the storm, and stopping the old habit of treating every anxious thought as an absolute truth. She remained anchored within the solid reality of her own breathing frame, recognizing that she could manage the ledger without allowing the internal threads of her presence to be pulled apart by the fear of tomorrow. The absolute quality of the weave is never determined by the speed at which the bundles are counted, for the raw fiber only discovers its strength when the hand stops rushing the work. The deep emotional patterns that exhaust us at night are often born from a fundamental misunderstanding of how internal balance operates. When we lie awake in the dark, the mind frequently engages in a frantic effort to manage the past, attempting to fix historic junctions that have long since set in the stone of reality. We employ an inner mechanism of hypervigilance, treating the existence of a routine day or a lost metric as an emergency that must be solved before we are allowed to rest. This constant surveying of our memories is a hidden attempt to manufacture safety out of absolute certainty. We mistakenly believe that if we can perform perfectly enough in our thoughts, we can avoid the discomfort of our current limits entirely. We begin to look at our actual, unadorned life as a kind of punishment, using internal shame to chide the heart whenever it wishes to simply occupy its own ground. Buddhist wisdom looks at this internal friction and offers a clear, liberating perspective on human discomfort. There is a fundamental distinction between the weight that naturally belongs to an event and the extra weight we manufacture through our resistance to the present. The initial friction of a difficult outcome or a routine chore is like the natural texture of raw, unbleached hemp strands, coarse and unrefined to the touch. The real suffering begins when we try to pull the threads apart with our thoughts, attempting to force our awareness completely into an imagined timeline, so that no presence remains for the life we actually have. We turn a normal turn of events into a deep personal fracture by treating every unchosen metric as a direct proof of our unworthiness. True peace does not come from erasing the plain seasons from our personal history, but from changing how we hold our balance when the loom begins to move. Consider the physics of a flat copper token working in the silence of the courtyard. The instrument does not protect the steady count by locking its metal edge into a rigid, immovable line against the clay floor. If the worker were to press the metal down with total crushing force, the sudden friction would simply gouge the surface, causing the entire process to come to a painful halt. The mechanism remains functional, precisely because it allows the slide to exist, letting the heavy, changing requirements adjust themselves without becoming a permanent distortion of the center alignment. When we refuse to allow our current reality to be exactly what it is, we are acting like a jammed spindle, resisting the movement of the fiber and wondering why our spirit feels so strained. To alter your relationship with this emotional tension is to realize that an ordinary day is not a definition of your limits, but a form of historical clarity. You do not need to convert every dull task into a debt that must be paid by your nervous system until mourning the labor occurred. But your habit of over-rehearsing creates a continuous echo that strains the chest. By standing firmly within the clean perimeter of your current frame, you allow the phantom timelines to drop away without leaving a mark on your value. The structural integrity of your life does not require you to balance the ghost weights of an alternate career path. Bringing this architecture down into the small, practical exchanges of tomorrow completely alters the physics of your awareness. It allows you to meet the demands of the modern workplace with an unshakable sense of place, knowing that your ultimate responsibility is to preserve the space where your own presence can breathe. The pattern of converting an old routine into a permanent identity is a defense mechanism developed by an exhausted intellect. We weave the story of our mechanical insignificance so tightly into our daily interactions that the narrative itself becomes a heavy garment we refuse to take off. Even when the workday is perfectly done, we begin to fear the very idea of a simple, unadorned space, believing that if we stop guarding our professional status, we will instantly become entirely worthless. Yet the teaching of the weaving frame shows that the true protection of the heart is not its grandeur or its distinction, but its capacity to remain steady under the heavy packing comb of life. You are not the tedious ledger that took place in the office, nor are you the judgment of those who look only at production charts. You are the continuous, open awareness that contains both the raw strand and the finished weave. If it feels right, let your attention expand past the narrow boundary of the immediate target you have been trying to achieve since dusk. You might notice how the darkness does not ask you to provide a certificate of extraordinary success before it allows the nervous system to settle. The space in your room is completely empty of expectations, holding your physical weight with a steady, unblinking presence that asks for no defense. Let the need to be vindicated by the past drop away into the shadows of the floorboards, leaving you completely clear, unshared, and grounded in the quiet reality of this sleeping frame. This architecture of the simple loom frame lands with grounding clarity when you find yourself sitting in the modern glare of a glowing digital display, watching for a specific text notification that refuses to arrive. You might notice the hand moving automatically to grasp the device, refreshing the interface for reassurance like an apprentice, frantically trying to pull a single strand of thread to force the pattern, instead of letting the warp sit securely on its heavy timber brackets. We spend our afternoons smiling through modern conversations while carrying a deep, heavy depletion in the gut, pretending that our emotional fiber is completely dense, unyielding, and untouched by the routine boredom of the workplace. When the late night finally arrives, we lie down under the weight of an invisible timeline, comparing our slow, quiet endurance with the loud, curated lives of peers we have never actually met. The internal critic begins to declare that your creative capacity has failed completely, spinning a long narrative that demands you earn the right to rest through a constant execution of automated tasks. The actual implementation of this wisdom does not require a sudden departure to a quiet valley porch, as it unfolds within the small, ordinary breaks of a chaotic afternoon. It begins when you allow a single second of physical stillness to exist between a routine digital demand and the voice that rises up to carry the entire blame. When a wave of anxiety arrives to tell you that you must fix a relationship you cannot control, you can notice the pattern without immediately twisting your entire framework to absorb the metallic tension. You can care deeply about the individuals in your immediate circle, without attempting to clamp down tightly on the exact movement of their internal weather. Resting is not a special reward that must be purchased with an unblemished record of constant professional distinctiveness, as the frame is permitted to stand quiet in the dark simply because the sun has dropped below the ridge. We often treat our internal feelings of guilt as a strict blueprint, running to adjust our posture the moment a critical thought echoes through the chest. A more resilient way is to let the memory of the daily routine pass through the open spaces of your awareness without deciding that the current structure has suffered a fatal collapse. You might observe the thought, feel its coarse, raw hemp texture against your mind, and then choose to leave it sitting separate from your sense of worth. This is the practical art of modern, self-contained living, an unhurried decision to stop filling the healthy intervals of your days with the fragile mortar of constant performance. You can allow the open gaps in your career history to remain completely empty, letting the daily pressure pass clean through without declaring the center broken beyond repair. And now the external world can finally recede behind the clean, dry boards of your own secure sanctuary. The dark room around you requires no performance, no production targets, and no explanations for the clear boundary your spirit has chosen to draw tonight. The modern world may continue to demand a smooth, specialized presentation, but the night recognizes the profound beauty of your unadorned presence. By ceasing the frantic effort to polish away your history, you allow the deep lines of your ordinary experiences to hold the frame together without tension. You are left entirely with your own essential presence, a solid and uncomplicated form that needs no external validation to be whole. Let the need to be verified by the marketplace slide away into the shadows of the floorboards, leaving your personal space completely clear, unshared, and at peace. Your breathing continues its slow, unsteered movement, a calm tide that honors the natural boundaries of the body without any interference from the conscious mind. It enters as a cool guest, fills the interior chambers with a steady presence, and then departs completely, leaving no lingering attachment behind. If it feels right, allow your consciousness to match this fluid process, letting the memories of the day's interactions pass out through the perimeter of your awareness without trying to hold their outlines. The files you sorted, the registers you updated, and the words you spoke have all found their own places in the landscape of the past, requiring no further editing from your tired thoughts. The night has officially closed the ledger of your utility, drawing a clear, dark line between the duties of the sun and the sanctuary of the midnight hour. You might notice how the weight of the legs and the lower spine begins to flatten completely, surrendering their form to the total security of the surface below. There is no longer any need to keep the fingers flexed for the next task, and there is no obligation to hold the eyes open to monitor the horizon for potential threats. The machinery of your analytical mind is allowed to unhook its cogs, letting the heavy iron weights drop gently into the dark soil beneath the room. The space inside your skin belongs exclusively to your own rest, a sovereign territory that cannot be taxed by the demands of the town or evaluated by the standards of the crowd. As the internal speed continues to match the quiet cadence of the summer rain, you step entirely out of the race, returning to the humble, unyielding foundation that has always held your name in the dark. The dark coordinates of the room have dissolved into a deep, unmeasured shadow, softening every boundary until the space around you feels vast and clear. Let the surface beneath you receive the full density of your frame tonight, as your limbs grow heavy and the center of your gravity settles firmly into the quiet mattress. The mind has no further structures to build, and no further metrics to count before the morning light touches the valley village. The smooth boxwood shuttle has been laid aside on the flat clay bench, cool and still, requiring no further verification from your fingers. With each slow movement of your chest, the air passes softly through the throat, returning to the open dark without any deliberate effort from your frame. The summer rain outside has turned into a quiet whisper, passing cleanly through the valley fields without meeting any resistance. You can feel the breath becoming a natural, unowned tide, a gentle rising and falling that requires no steering from your will. It is the simple weight of the universe itself, resting securely within the parameters of the evening. Every ordinary strand of your history is settling deep into the dark earth, leaving your hands empty and your posture light, resting softly against the fabric of the night. You do not need to figure out how to arrange the pieces of tomorrow, and you do not need to dissolve your edges to maintain the production of the world. The darkness itself is your sanctuary, a place where the specialized roles and the routine rows are held with the exact same unyielding support. Let the final images of the low loom house and the valley storehouse fade away into the featureless blackness of sleep. The flat copper token is resting. The tools are laid down, and the core weave stands perfectly set on its own center, without demanding to be smoothed away. You are returning to the deep, unblended home of your own individual presence, a space that was never compromised, never eroded, and never lost. The night is wide, the room is still, and you are completely free to leave the world outside your perimeter. Let your awareness slide effortlessly into the dark, warm currents of rest, drifting deeper and deeper into the uncomplicated peace of an undisturbed sleep. The silence that fills these openings does not weaken your foundation, as it provides the very room required for the spirit to adjust its weight without friction. We spend our days running from the spaces between things, rushing to plug every silence with a modern justification or an anxious performance. Yet the deep architecture of the night reveals that the spaces are not empty voids waiting to be feared, but natural intervals of pure restoration. The mind does not need to cement itself to every passing expectation to be valuable, for a single coarse fiber is perfectly complete simply by resting on the ground where it fell. Let the heavy demand for continuous production slip away into the shadows of the floorboards, leaving your personal space completely clear, unshared, and at peace. Your breathing continues its slow, unsteered movement, a calm tide that honors the natural boundaries of the body without any interference from the conscious mind. It enters as a cool guest, fills the interior chambers with a steady presence, and then departs completely, leaving no lingering attachment behind. If it feels right, allow your consciousness to match this fluid process, letting the memories of the day's interactions pass out through the perimeter of your awareness without trying to hold their outlines. The files you updated, the schedules you managed, and the words you spoke have all found their own places in the landscape of the past, requiring no further editing from your tired thoughts. The night has officially closed the ledger of your utility, drawing a clear, dark line between the duties of the sun and the sanctuary of the midnight hour. We often function under the heavy misconception that to be valuable, we must allow our own ground to be entirely flooded by the specialized demands of others. We become like the low valley fields during a heavy seasonal downpour, absorbing every drop of water until the soil turns to mud and can no longer support the roots of the trees. The wisdom of the copper token reminds us that true utility is an act of solid alignment, not an act of dissolving. By remaining steady within the clear parameters of your own physical form, you offer the world a reliable anchor rather than a collapsing surface. You do not need to feel guilty for keeping your edges dry, for it is only from a position of stable ground that a hand can ever be safely extended to another. Let the weight of your head sink a fraction deeper into the fabric beneath it, allowing the remaining tightness in the neck and upper back to completely unwind. The long muscles of the limbs are growing heavier with every passing breath, surrendering their posture to the absolute security of the bed. Every point where your body meets the surface below is a clean boundary, a physical reminder that you are a distinct, precious form resting safely within your own territory. The space outside your walls belongs entirely to the night, and you have no obligation to police its winds or manage its changing temperatures. The world is fully capable of spinning through the dark without your vigilant watch, holding its communities and its valleys in a state of unhurried balance while you rest. The modern anxieties that felt so solid during the afternoon, the unresolved messages, the comparisons, the persistent fear of falling behind, are now revealed to be nothing more than light dust floating through the entry. They possess no independent power to crack your foundation, and they only become heavy when you try to grasp them and hold them against your chest. Let the stream of your awareness move with a slow, hypnotic rhythm, allowing all the unnecessary debris of the day to fall through the open grid onto the earth below. The clean, heavy fibers of your true being remain safely inside the frame, untouched by the moisture that passes through the weave. You are left entirely with your own essential presence, a solid and uncomplicated form that needs no external validation to be whole. The quietness of this hour is a total sanctuary of non-doing, a vast and peaceful expanse where the passage of minutes has lost its sharp necessity. The sunrise is still a distant reality, hidden behind the dark rim of the western ridge. Leaving these hours exclusively for the recovery of your spirit, there is no problem that must be solved before your eyes can close, and there is no relationship that must be perfectly aligned before you are permitted to drift away. You are free to let the tools drop from your hands, to let the boxwood shuttle rest on the table, and to allow your consciousness to sink into the deep, dark spaces between the moments. Allow the final remnants of intentional thought to thin out like the last traces of rain clearing from the broad hosta leaves in the midnight air. The air is still, the valley is silent, and the completed hemp mat rests perfectly balanced on its own center, enduring the dark without a single drop of hesitation. You are sinking deeper now, moving past the realm of social obligation, past the need for language, and past the boundaries of the historical self. There is only this immediate, unhurried breath, this profound density of the resting frame, and this complete surrender to the dark, healing current of the evening. Let the quiet darkness carry you all the way down into the deep, unmeasured peace of an undisturbed sleep. If the heavy mat protects the floor simply by remaining plain and resting on the earth, why do you still demand that your ordinary days be spun from gold? The question dissolves into the deep shadow of the workspace, leaving no ripple on the vast quietness that has settled around your resting form. There is no requirement to answer the intellect tonight, and no obligation to trace the origin of your professional doubts before your eyes are allowed to close. The unbleached threads of the mat do not defend their simple texture to the hall, nor do they apologize to the valley for being plain and unadorned. They simply rest in their designated places, locked securely within the heavy embrace of the frame, completely at peace with the weight they hold in the dark. Observe how the cool evening air moves through the center of the chest, traveling with a slow, organic cadence that requires absolutely no management from your thoughts. The breath does not keep track of your career milestones. It does not evaluate your creative output, and it does not rush to complete its path to prove its efficiency to the world. It enters as a quiet, unearned guest, filling the interior chambers with a steady presence, and then departs softly into the dark, leaving your boundaries completely intact and unblemished. If it feels right, allow your awareness to match this uncalculated existence, letting the heavy habit of intellectual validation coast to a total, peaceful halt. The memories of the monotonous ledger columns, the abstract targets, and the digital friction you collected since dawn are losing their density now, softening like light wood dust floating down to the earthen floor. They hold no independent authority to compress your ribs. They possess no power to keep your nervous system on guard, and they cannot warp the profound grounding that has claimed your physical body. You can feel the immense, comforting weight of the hips, the total relaxation of the lower jaw, and the complete release of the fingers as they rest open against the fabric of the bed. Every point where your frame meets the surface below is a steady reassurance from the earth that your immediate environment is secure. Your sanctuary is private, and you are fully permitted to drop the role of the worker tonight. We often function under the heavy misconception that our true value must be manufactured through continuous, extraordinary achievements, turning each ordinary task into a source of personal shame if it does not bring grand recognition. Yet the wisdom of the low loom house reminds us that the highest dignity lives not in the specialized title, but in the capacity to bring an undivided presence to the plainest row of life. Your essential nature is not the exhaustion, the alienation, or the metrics that the intellect keeps replaying in the dark. You are the vast, unblinking space that witnesses these passing loops, remaining completely whole, resilient, and undisturbed beneath the surface noise of the marketplace. The world may demand a constant display of specialized utility, but the inner grain remains steady, deep, and entirely at peace. Let this quiet recognition settle deep into the marrow of your bones, operating not as a complex calculation to be tracked, but as a heavy, soothing gravity that invites your entire being to rest. There is no need to hold on to these reflections, no requirement to remember these descriptions, and no obligation to maintain any focus as the midnight hour deepens. The spoken lines are simply quiet wooden markers along the edge of your space, blending into the natural background noise of the night like the soft patter of rain moving through the garden foliage. You can permit the words to dissolve into a formless, gentle murmur, a regular cadence that softly nudges your consciousness further down into the warm, dark currents of deep rest. The room around you has become an absolute sanctuary of non-doing, a vast expanse where the pressure to justify your identity has been completely cleared from the air. The morning is far away, resting behind the dark silhouette of the western ridge, leaving these hours entirely dedicated to the profound recovery of your spirit. You do not need to solve the riddle of your career tonight, and you do not need to guarantee that your creative voice is perfectly realized before you are permitted to drift away. The universe is fully capable of managing its own heavy cycles without your active intervention, holding the fields, the rivers, and the quiet valley storehouses in a state of effortless equilibrium while you sleep. Allow the final remnants of active thought to drift away like the last thin wisps of evening mist clearing from the weathered timber beams. The air is flat, the sky is dark, and the open frame requires no effort to let the quiet night air pass cleanly through its center. You are sinking deeper now, moving past the realm of memory, past the need for control, and past the heavy boundaries of the automated self. There is only this immediate, unhurried breath, this profound heaviness of the limbs, and this complete surrender to the dark, healing sanctuary of the midnight hour. Let the quiet darkness carry you all the way down into the deep, unmeasured peace of an undisturbed sleep. The vast shelter of this undisturbed sleep expands its territory through the quiet dark of your room, washing over the remaining edges of your thoughts until the need to calculate your position in the professional world completely disappears. The mind has spent so many seasons acting as a frantic surveyor, checking the seams of your daily routines for any sign of personal stagnation. Yet the immense expanse of the evening reveals that true belonging requires no worldly movement at all. In this quiet architecture of the heart, there is no quota of performance that must be met before you are permitted to completely vanish into the stillness. The night does not audit the length of your resting hours, nor does it demand that your journey toward inner freedom be justified by a specific corporate address or an elevated status label. It simply stands wide open, a dark and supportive reservoir of absolute calm that accepts your presence with the exact same unconditional embrace whether your labor feels ordinary or grand. Observe how the cool evening air claims its own territory within the lungs, moving smoothly without your active steering, filling the chest like the slow, steady accumulation of groundwater within a deep stone well. The liquid does not ask how many channels it passed through to reach the basin, nor does it calculate the precise dimensions of the hollow paths it left behind on the high slopes. It is simply present, cool, steady, and perfectly at peace with its own volume. Allow your awareness to match this uncalculated existence, dropping the subtle internal tension of trying to reach an external destination before the dawn arrives. The day has run its course, and the tools of interaction are laid down, leaving you with absolutely nothing to complete, nothing to verify, and nothing to prove to the quiet space around you. The thoughts that once felt like heavy stone blocks pressing against your ribs are now losing their density, drifting away like dry hemp fibers carried off by a slow valley wind. They possess no weight of their own, no power to command your obedience, and no capacity to disturb the deep grounding that has settled into your physical frame. You can feel the heavy, comfortable density of your legs, the complete relaxation of the lower back, and the soft opening of the palms as they rest against the fabric of the bed. Every point where your body meets the surface below is a direct message from the earth, reminding you that your perimeter is secure, your form is supported, and you are allowed to drop the heavy armor of vigilance you have carried since the morning. We often live under the persistent illusion that our inner peace must be earned through a series of successful completions, believing that we can only rest once every professional connection has been perfectly cemented. Yet the wisdom of the thick boxwood shuttle points to a far more profound freedom, the realization that the ordinary rows are the very condition that allows the spirit to discover its unmoving ground. Your true nature is not the collection of expectations, comparisons, or social anxieties that the mind keeps trying to arrange in the dark. You are the vast, silent space in which those elements briefly arise and quietly fade away, completely untouched by the narratives they attempt to weave. The wind may whistle through the courtyard, but it can never alter the essential quality of the bedrock itself. Let this understanding sink deep into the marrow of your bones. operating not as a complex philosophy to be analyzed, but as a warm, heavy blanket that invites your entire being to soften. There is no need to hold on to this teaching, no need to remember these sentences, and no need to maintain any focus as the night deepens. The spoken cadences are simply markers along the perimeter of your room, a passing wind through the courtyard grasses that does not ask to be captured or analyzed by a tired mind. You can permit the words to blur into a formless murmur, a soothing rhythm that gently nudges your consciousness further down into the warm, dark currents of deep rest. The room around you has become an absolute sanctuary of non-doing, a space where the passage of time has lost its sharp edges and its constant demands. The morning is far away, resting behind a horizon that has not yet begun to turn, leaving these hours entirely dedicated to the profound restoration of your spirit. You do not need to solve the riddle of your life tonight, and you do not need to ensure that every boundary has been perfectly understood before your eyes close. The universe is fully capable of maintaining its balance without your active participation, holding the mountains, the rivers, and the quiet riverside sheds in a state of effortless equilibrium while you sleep. Allow the final remnants of intentional thought to drift away like the last thin wisps of evening mist dissolving over the surface of a still mountain lake. The water is flat, the sky is dark, and the reflection of the stars requires no effort to remain perfectly clear. You are sinking deeper now, moving past the realm of memory, past the need for language, and past the boundaries of the historical self. There is only this immediate, unhurried breath, this profound heaviness of the limbs, and this complete surrender to the dark, healing sanctuary of the midnight hour. Let the quiet darkness carry you all the way down into the deep, unmeasured peace of an undisturbed sleep.